Hello everyone, and welcome to Top Channel 101. So this is going to be like a beginner tutorial, just taking you through the basics of our Blender, and we're going to be doing this Edison screw light bulb. And I've searched some Google images for references because you always want to start with that. You don't want to have the proportions off. That's why you always need a reference image. So I'm going to drag this image directly into Blender, into the viewport, and that should import my image. Try and find a proper reference image with less perspective. So you want an image that was shot with a tighter lens, or something like a 100mm lens, and maybe this. Yeah, let's go with this. Also seem to be the same make, so that's great. Okay, now let's jump in, and I'm going to turn on my shortcuts so that you can see what keys I'm pressing. They're going to be on the left here, and let me just move this here. One thing I usually do when I'm working with reference images is I select the image. I'll go to this setting here, turn on opacity and reduce its opacity down so that I can still see the meshes, the mesh where I'm editing it, because if I have it at full transparency, especially if it's white, it can be a bit difficult to see what's going on. And we can start with making this screw. Let me also remove the camera, we don't really need it right now. Okay, so for this, to make this screw shape here, there are several ways you can do this. You can use the screw modifier, but that's a bit difficult to use. You can use geometry nodes. They have a screw primitive that you can use. But let me show you an easier way to do this. You can use a circle, a mesh circle. We are not going to use a lot of vertices. We can use something like trade-off. We can add that resolution back using a subdivision modifier. I'm going to go to edit mode using a tab, and then rotate it so that it aligns with the angle of these screws. And you can see one goes like this, rotates, screws in the back, and then comes. So it's basically this ring here. There are two rings that join. So I'm going to follow that. So that's one side. I can go to the other side, to the mirror of this side, and I use Y to separate one side. So that is like that. And I'm going to select one of the edges. So that is the active edge, the middle edge as the active edge. And if you use the period key, you can select the active element so that you can rotate it using that point there. Now I can go back to the front view. I'll rotate this so that I can line that up. And now you can see we have a screw effect. Then I can grab everything, merge by distance, so that this is now, if I use Ctrl L, this is now a single element like that. I can duplicate this until these line up again. And I'm just going to move this until I make sure that everything lines up correctly. And for some reason it doesn't here, but I'm just going to merge that like that, so that yeah, I know that now it lines up. So I don't have a side profile to check this out, but I can grab this edge and just try and follow the curvature or this curve like this. And now I can come here and just rotate it, so I have a complete thing like that. It's not going to line up correctly because remember there is perspective in this image, so that's something you have to account for. And one more thing we could do is grab this half and make sure that this side, this edge is the active element. Shift this so that I can duplicate it, and now I can rotate this. So we have the end part, and I think I can just scale it in a bit like that, and then again merge by distance. So we have something like that. Now, if you want to line this up, you can use proportional editing. I'm just going to select this side, and I just, using proportional editing, just move these so that they align correctly like that. And the next step would be to just duplicate this. I'm just going to have this as a copy, rotate, and convert it to a curve. And in the curve editor, I can go to geometry and increase the depth. So we have something like that. If I shade smooth, oh, one thing I forgot probably was to rotate this on the X 180 degrees. And it should be on the Y, like that. So yeah, so that would be the next thing, and we might want to align this again. So maybe rotate it a bit, and then you would, to get the complete bulb, you just duplicate this, and the next step is to grab this, make sure that our pivot point is at the medium, and you do that by using the period key and then getting this pie menu like that. So the next step would be to just duplicate this and mirror this on the X. We want this to be mirrored in the center, so I'm just going to use Shift S so that I can change my cursor to the pivot point, and now I can use the period key this time, use the cursor as the pivot point. We want to mirror this on the Y and also mirror it on the X, so that these now are basically alternating in direction, so that the circles are alternating in direction, and I can just use Alt S to basically shrink the depth directly here. So Alt S, so something like this, and it seems these also tighten. These screws also tighten as we go up. So I'm going to turn on proportional editing and make sure you have connected only, so that only the connected vertices or points are being scaled in. And I'm going to grab these 2 points, and just scale them in. As you can see that the top ones kind of shrink in a bit. So just do that. And we need to have this connected somehow, so I'm just going to come in. Unfortunately, I don't have a top reference image, so I'm just going to eyeball this or just estimate how things would be. Turn off proportional editing and just let me bring this back to my middle point and just try to move things around until I get something that would make sense for a bulb like this. Yeah, something like that should make sense. And we can bring this back in, and you can see it's nearly identical to what we have. So that was part 1. Part 2, let's go and work on this. Okay, so if you want to look at the project files, you can go to blendereverything.com, which is my website, and you can go to the free models section. I have a lot of free stuff there, and this is going to also include this project file if you want to check it out yourself. You can also check out other stuff here, like in the geometry nodes section, where I have things like geometry setups, like the railroad generator, and plenty of other things, city. Yeah, basically a lot of stuff there. I'm also adding more content. We should just start with a circle. I make sure that our cursor is in the middle. We can do mesh, circle. Again, we don't need too many vertices. We can always use the subdivision surface for that and to add more resolution. So I'm just going to bring this up to that line, and since this line can be used to separate the top half and the top and the bottom half, I can use that as a starting point for the bottom half, like that. Remember, this image has a lot of perspective, so you don't have to line up everything, because if we try to line up everything, we would have to rotate this somewhat like this and then bring that up. So that would mean that this mesh lines up with the image, but then we have created a new issue where this is just tilted like that, and that's not what we want. So let's fix that again. Just let me turn off proportional editing. Just make sure that everything is straight up lined. Let me remove this. Just grab this and extrude it down to about somewhere like that. Shrink that in. You can see this has kind of a bell shape, so I'm going to try and go for that. Let me scale this down like that, and you can add in resolution using Ctrl R to add in edge loops. Use S. I'm also using Alt and then left click. Yeah, left click to select an entire edge loop like that, and so I get something like that, and I can extrude this down a bit, scale it basically to get the entire shape like that. And now this is the top bottom half. sorry, the bottom half. So you can, to get this look like it's aligning with the mesh, I can use Control 2 to add the subdivisions shortcut, the subdivision surface. That's just a simple shortcut for doing that. And I can also turn on shading, smooth shading, to get that. So you can see how things are looking. I can also extrude this so that we can start working on the top half. So I can extrude this, scale that in, and maybe we can also have a reference image here, just because this, remember we reduced the opacity here, so it's getting a bit hard to see how things look. So I'm just going to come to have a reference image here, and just add that there, so I can look at things, look at how things look, and go to top view and hit F to fill that in, and then I to insert, just to get more details. So you can see that this here is a bit sharp, so I'm going to add a supporting edge loop using Control R, like that, so that area looks as sharp, and maybe even another supporting edge loop, and shrink this a bit so that so we have something like that. We also might need an edge loop that makes up this line. Okay, now to add this edge loop, let's make sure that this is lining up correctly. Okay, so now we can use this as that edge, and we can use Control B to bevel that edge loop, and so it will look like this. And then I can use Control E to extrude in like that, and that would give us a line like that. And then we need to make this very sharp, so I'm going to add supporting edge loop here and a supporting edge loop here. One way to make those sharp without adding more geometry, you can use, let me first remove this edge loop using Control X to dissolve that edge loop. You can select those edge loops you want to make sharp, and just use Shift E1, and that would give you the sharp edge like that. Or you can use Control E and just use this slider to determine how sharp. So one is full sharpness, and anything in between just gives you something in between. And I think this line is a bit too, the gap is a bit too big, so I'm going to just shrink it even further, so we have something like that. And at the bottom we can use this Control F and use Shift E to sharpen things a bit without adding too much geometry, and I can insert this as well. And we don't need this extra geometry or n-gon. I can remove that, so we have something like that. Now let's create this bottom piece. I'm just going to grab this edge loop and use Shift D to duplicate it, and then push it out a bit using scale, extrude down like that. And I'm also going to first isolate this using Shift H, so we have that only, and use Control E to remove, use Shift E to remove the sharpness we added before. So Control E until those blue lines are removed. One other thing I could do is separate this mesh. So P to separate the selected, and so I have these two separated. You can also turn on random colors so that you can see the different pieces separately. So you can go to the viewport here, shading, and turn on random colors so that you can see the distinctive objects, or so you can see the different objects separately. Now let's create this screw effect. Again, you can use the same technique of just, get extrude up to this, and I just come up to here, and I think I can start with the top half. Let me first remove this subdivision. I can grab this edge loop and this, hit Y to separate this, and just make sure that I have I think I need the other half, so let me select this, and make sure we're using active selection, and we can rotate this now like this, so we end up with something like this. And I make sure that I merge, so this is one piece. And again, I can grab this up to this, Shift D, and this time the active element should be that side. I'll rotate it until these line up, but we need to mirror this on the X. On the X, so we have a screw effect that looks like that. This extra vertex is not necessary, and again I need to merge everything by distance. So we have this continuous edge loop, and maybe we need to have it rotated a bit more. Let me see. And I can duplicate this, make sure they line up. Just merge this with this. We can repeat this one more time. Yeah, so we have that. One other thing we could do is separate this piece like that, and then we can go in, convert this to a curve, and in the curve I give this some depth like that. But remember, we are creating these I think screw ridges or whatever they're called, and I'm going to what we can do is we don't want the full tube like that. We can use the full mode, the fill mode, change to back or front. Let's see, half. Yeah, half like that, and that should give us what we want. And then the other thing is we need to reduce the depth, the bevel resolution here, so that we don't, so that we, I think something like, yeah, actually 0 is what we want to have, and then we can convert this to a mesh. So we have something like this, and I think I might want to scale this down. And one other thing we need to do is we don't need this much resolution, and there also seems to be some twisting, so I'm going to make sure that the twist method is Z, so that everything, this middle edge is always in the middle. Minimum, you see it's a bit offset, but Z up just make sure that it's always aligned in the middle. And the other thing I wanted to do is reduce the resolution of this, because it seems we have too many points. So what I could do is convert this to because it's already a curve, I can go in here and use right click, set spline type to Bezier, and make sure that everything is set to automatic. And you can use right click and then decimate curve. That should give you an option to reduce the number of points that are used to represent this curve, and something like that is enough. And if you go to wireframe, which you can access under viewport, wireframe, no, it's under viewport overlays, wireframe. I just have it under quick favorites. Yeah, so we have that. You can see the wireframe. We still have a lot of resolution. What we can do now is just reduce the resolution directly here, and just that is enough. Anything else we can add using a subdivision surface. Then I can convert this to a mesh, and now I just need to. Okay, it seems that we have removed too much resolution. So let me go back a bit, and we don't want to remove too much. Okay, I can convert this back to a mesh. Let me remove my wireframe. Now we have this. Now we just have to fill in the gaps here. That shouldn't be too difficult. And you'll see that in some areas you have extra resolution than other areas. That is how decimate curve sometimes works. So you might want to make sure that there is an even distribution of edges. Because what we're going to do is make sure that we fill in these gaps, and we can use the bridge tool. Just select two vertices like that that have the same amount of polygons, and just right click to bridge edge loops like that. You might run into these issues where these edges are not lining up correctly, but that's okay. You can just try and slide them. Do the same thing for this top side. So I'm going to select, and first isolate this, select this up to here, extrude, and scale this, flatten that like this. And I can also select this side, make sure that this is also flattened. And then now we have to deal with this. Now, the issue we're having here is that this edge loop comes here and then rotates back up. We don't want that. So what I can do is terminate it somewhere. So I can add the edge loop here. Actually, I need to first dissolve this so that I can add the edge loop and just have it supported. I support this like that. Then maybe just bring this here. Yeah, I think that's good enough. Bring back all the other pieces. Now I can grab, fill it in, and just make sure that it's also a perfect circle. Let me just make sure that it lines up correctly. This might be about here. Okay. Extrude down. One other thing you could do is you could see is we have these details here. Those are easy. We can just convert this into a mesh and just select this edge loop, Shift D, just move it up, then extrude, and then push down, just like that. Now, if we give this a subdivision, you can see we get that detail quite easily. Yeah, lining up. So yeah, that's part 2. The next part we can do some basic UV unwrapping. Do UV unwrapping, and then part 4 we can add. You can create materials and then texturing in part 4. So if you ever find yourself needing to recreate a scene from the real world within Blender, check out Perspective Plotter, which aligns your 3D camera in Blender to the camera that was used to take the reference image you're looking at. It's an amazing add-on. I just uses these controls to line up your scene, your 3D view with whatever image you have in the scene. Links are going to be in the description. And also, if you're into character modeling, but you lack the time to create the clothes, because you know that's a lot of time, check out the Epic Preset Clothing Pack, which is a library of clothes that range from anything you can think of for your character. Is always updated with new stuff. You can see it has a ton of content and very easy to use, especially with the asset browser. So yeah, all links are going to be in the description, and that if you use any of the links in the description also helps out the channel. So thank you for that. Let's do some UV unwrapping. I'm going to change this area here into a UV editor. And let's start UV unwrapping this. I'm using the / key to isolate this. So we have this mesh. If you try to unwrap it here, you can see it doesn't unwrap correctly. But whenever you see this shape here, you will see this a lot when you're UV unwrapping. Something that looks like this, especially if it's some sort of tube, you don't even have to go in here. You just have to go to the UV editor, use hold down Alt, and then select any edge loop, maybe anything like this, and just use Ctrl E so that you can add a seam that goes through this. You only need one seam, and like I've added, and unwrap to unwrap it like that. As you can see, so that will just simply add a seam like that. The only issue you would have is that you won't know where the seam is going to be added. Like right now, the seam is added to the outside, but usually you want your seam to be on the inside where it's not easily seen. So let me clear that. Add a seam in the inside like that. Ctrl E, mark seam, and then unwrap. That should unwrap our mesh. Okay, what else? Now let's unwrap this. Whenever you have an object that already has something like this, and a line within the model itself, you can use that as the seam, So because you always want to hide your seams, so I'm going to hide that seam, the seam for this object inside there. So basically it's a natural seam, and unwrap that. One other thing I could do is because it would be a bit difficult to texture this, I'm just going to add a seam onto this mesh. I want to know what island this is. Yeah, this here. I want to add a seam on that, so that is opened up like that. Should make it easier for me to texture. Then this side, this one should also be very simple. We just need a seam right there. Ctrl E, mark seam, and then maybe a seam. Sometimes sometimes it's not as easy to hide seams. For example, in this area, in this object here, you don't really have a way, a good way to hide the seam. One other thing I need to do is reduce whatever is going on here. Let me add a supporting loop here. And instead of, let me just divert this edge loop so that it doesn't go continuously there. Seems to create a few issues. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. Let's unwrap this again. Perfect. Okay, so we have all the three objects unwrapped. Now we can pack them. No, one other thing you might notice is that this is not effective or efficient way to manage your UV space, because you can see that we have a lot of blank space here. We have a lot of blank space here, and the reason for that is because we have this long piece of island that is kind of leading to the squeezing of this space. So what we can do, you can split this mesh somewhere. Maybe I'm just going to split this, since this seems like it could also be a different part, and that separates these into two different pieces. That means that now these are going to get a different, are going to be sized a bit better. Okay, I'm not seeing how I could do that. Actually, this should be a bit maybe rotated like that. Yeah, something like that. We have finished UV unwrapping. Let's start working on some materials. Let's start with this fluorescent tube. We're going to use some translucence, some emission, yeah, I think, and this principal shade, I think. What we could do is bring in a mask, because these fluorescent tubes usually, to get that fluorescent effect, we can use layer weight to give us that effect there, which is nice. And we're going to blend these two materials using the facing to give us that kind of fluorescent effect in case we want it. And we can also make this quite reflective. And, you can already see it gives us that nice effect, makes it look a bit more fluorescent, more like a tube. And you can even play with the colors. And I think I can just use color, an RGB node, so that the translucent and the base color have the same effect. So you can see, kind of makes it look like a bulb. And we can also, because right now this would be a bulb when it's off, so the emission will just help us make it a bulb when it's on. Just have this here. And you can turn that on like that. And we can also still use the facing to influence how the emission is done. So yeah, that's on. If you have bloom on, you can see, and since we're using the same color for all of things, I'll get that. Now we can turn this off completely or on. We can have another shader node because we want to be able to switch this off and on, so we can have a shader node here. with the emission on and the original shader here. Actually, it should be the opposite here. So now that means that the bulb is off, and if we set this at 1, then the bulb is on, 0 is off. Yeah, so something like that. Now for the plastic area, we can just make it simple. Get something simple like this. Save that, and just looks like that. Not very great. Make sure I have UV mapping on. What I can do is add an empty. Select this as the object, and change this to object mapping. Like that. So that means that we have an object, we have a texture that is wrapped onto this. So then I can do, the other thing I could do is just make sure that in the settings here, I have clip turned on. Just then I can bring this here. So I can just decide where I want to have this. I can even remove the empty. Now the only issue we are having is that we also have other sides that are kind of getting the same mask and the same image. Now what I can do is just select the faces that I want to have this texture or label. I'll go to, you can go to vertex paint. Let's make sure that make this black, Shift K, and that should give us a mask for that selected part. Come back here. Okay, so now that we have our mask and the texture, what we can do is bring that in here. So that's our mask, and this is our texture, and this is our alpha. So we can try and mix up the this color mask we have just created with using vertex colors and the alpha mask of this. So we can use a mix RGB or mix color. So this and the alpha, we can use, you can try multiply. So you can see we have subtracted, or we have removed the other third, but we just need to invert this. So we only have that. And then now we can bring in our mix RGB again, bring the image, and now this is going to be our factor. Actually, this should be like this, and now we can determine what our background is going to be by just doing that. And this can be connected to the color, and we have something like that. Yeah, quite simple as that. Now we just need to add our camera. Let's go to, make sure that this is turned on. Maybe give it a nice color. Increase the power. And you have a bulb. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.